The hidden weight no one sees: you can do all the right things, eat healthy, take your vitamins, go for walks, and still wake up feeling heavy as if the air itself has turned thick. That's the quiet paradox after 65. The body may still move, but the heart carries an invisible load. Science has started to whisper what people living alone have known for years: that loneliness isn't just a feeling. It can slowly change your sleep, cloud your memory, drain your energy, and shorten your independence. The surprising twist: a single, small daily act, even something as simple as greeting one familiar face, can begin to reverse that decline. The difference between those who do and those who don't becomes visible in the smallest things. One person's eyes brighten after a morning call from a neighbor. Another's stay dull despite all the self-care routines in the world. And that's where the story begins. When silence becomes a symptom, Evelyn had lived in the same California bungalow for 32 years. After her husband passed, the house stayed quiet, too quiet. She followed advice she'd read, joined a walking group, kept busy, even took a watercolor class. But at night, she admitted, the silence felt louder than ever. Her sleep grew shallow, her appetite disappeared, and the mornings blurred together. Then a nurse at her clinic mentioned something unexpected: that loneliness affects the immune system like chronic stress. Evelyn blinked. No one had ever said it so directly. She began with one small change. Every morning, before touching her phone, she sent a short voice message to her niece. Not long, not dramatic, just a good morning. Within a week, her days felt less like empty rooms and more like moments with purpose. For someone over 65, that's what this means. Connection is not optional wellness. It's a vital sign. Have you noticed how even one real conversation can shift the color of a whole day? The body remembers absence. Researchers at several major universities have shown that social isolation in older adults is linked with increased inflammation and higher risk of heart disease, dementia, and sleep disruption. But the science can't capture what it feels like. Frank, 71, from Ohio, once said it best: "It's not just that I don't see people, it's that no one needs what's in my head anymore." That loss of relevance, not just company, is the wound many carry quietly. He started volunteering at a small museum, giving short tour about old cars. First, he thought it would fill time. Instead, it filled a silence he didn't even recognize had settled in his bones. The body remembers absence, but it also remembers being useful. If you ever wonder whether you're doing enough, ask yourself this: do you end the day having connected, even once, with another living person who knows your name? The small step that changes everything. Here's what doctors and psychologists now recommend, not as theory, but as practice. First, pick one predictable moment in your day: morning coffee, evening tea, or the walk to the mailbox. Next, tie it to a micro-action of connection. It might be calling one friend, greeting a neighbor, or sharing a photo with family. Then notice how your body feels after. Finally, repeat it every day for a week before deciding it doesn't work. It's not about making new friends overnight. It's about training your nervous system to expect contact again, to reopen the door that loneliness quietly locks. People who do this daily often report sleeping deeper and feeling more alert, not because of magic, but because the brain stops scanning for threat once it feels safe in connection. A conversation that saved a morning in a small coastal town in Maine: Margaret, 69, began talking to the mail carrier each day. At first, it was just, "Nice weather, isn't it?" Then she started asking about his family, his kids. Months later, she realized she'd built a small ritual: 2 minutes of real human warmth that carried her through hours of quiet. That's how it happens. Not in dramatic gestures, but in these small threads of humanity we weave back into our days. What this means for a 50-plus listener: every repeated act of connection builds emotional muscle, the same way walking builds physical balance. Do you have one person you could reach out to tomorrow just to say, "How are you?" The illusion of "I'm fine." There's a phrase that echoes in senior communities everywhere: "I'm fine." It's simple, polite, and too often untrue. After 65, loneliness rarely looks like sadness. It hides behind routines: TV humming late into the night, meals eaten over the sink, a tidy house that never feels alive. Most people don't realize that this quiet withdrawal doesn't just dull the spirit, it begins to reshape the brain. Studies from Harvard and the National Institute on Aging have shown that chronic isolation may impair memory and slow cognitive function. But here's the hidden layer: it's not the absence of people that does this, it's the absence of emotional exchange. So the daily step here is simple but radical: speak one truth aloud every day. To a friend, to a neighbor, even to yourself in the mirror. The moment words are spoken: "Today was hard," or "I miss my daughter," the mind unclenches. The body stops guarding the ache as if it were a secret, because silence may protect pride, but it starves connection. A letter never sent. Walter, a retired teacher from Oregon, once wrote letters he never mailed. Each morning, he'd sit at his kitchen table, the smell of coffee drifting through the room, and write to his late wife about the day ahead. He said it helped him keep her close. One day, his granddaughter found the letters while visiting. Instead of embarrassment, something else happened. She began writing back, not in reply, but in continuation. "Dear Grandpa, tell me more about the lake you mentioned." It became their private ritual, a thread of ink binding generations. That small practice transformed Walter's days. His doctor noticed his blood pressure had improved. His daughter said his laugh returned. What this means for a 50-plus listener: emotional expression, even through writing, counts as connection. The body feels heard. The heart feels seen. Instruction: rebuilding connection through daily words. Here's a simple way to begin restoring emotional contact, even if you live alone. First, choose a fixed time, morning or evening. Sit somewhere quiet where you feel safe. Next, name one emotion aloud or in writing, not analyzing it, just acknowledging it. "I feel lonely, I feel grateful, I feel tired." Then imagine you're saying it to someone who genuinely listens, a friend, a loved one, or even your younger self. Finally, take one calming breath and let the moment settle. That's it. It takes less than a minute, but it signals to the brain, I'm still in dialogue with the world. Do this daily for a week and see how your mood and clarity shift. Those who speak their truth softly each day often find that others begin to reach back, because energy moves where expression flows. When screens replace faces, digital life was supposed to help, and sometimes it does. But for many older adults, screens create a cruel paradox. We scroll, watch, read, even comment, yet rarely feel seen. The glow of the phone becomes the modern candle of loneliness, flickering, but cold. There's no shame in that. Technology fills a real need. Still, experts now warn that too much passive screen time is linked with higher feelings of isolation and disrupted sleep among seniors. The key is balance, turning devices from walls into windows. Start by replacing 10 minutes of scrolling with one live interaction, a short video call, a shared photo message, or even commenting thoughtfully under a friend's post instead of a random feed. Over time, this small digital shift rewires the pattern of connection back to warmth. Remember, technology isn't the enemy, disconnection is. The morning when loneliness lost in a small apartment in Chicago, Ruth, 74, began her day differently one winter. Instead of turning on the news first thing, she made tea, sat by the window, and called her former coworker, Mike. They talked about nothing: weather, groceries, silly memories. Weeks later, Ruth realized she was sleeping better. She said, "It's like my mornings finally have a heartbeat again." That's the power of one human voice breaking the morning silence. What this means for a 50-plus listener: don't underestimate micro moments of connection. They accumulate like savings in an emotional bank account. Have you had your heartbeat moment yet today? The chemistry of connection loneliness is not just in the mind, it's in the bloodstream. When we feel isolated, our bodies release more cortisol, the stress hormone. Over time, that excess can raise blood pressure, weaken immunity, and even affect how we metabolize sugar. Scientists at the University of California once called loneliness the new smoking, because its long-term impact can mirror physical neglect. But there's good news. The body is also wired for recovery. A single positive social interaction, even a brief one, can raise levels of oxytocin, a hormone that lowers stress and supports heart health. It's the same hormone released by laughter, gentle touch, or simply feeling seen. For someone over 65, this means your body is listening to your relationships as much as to your diet. You don't need dozens of friends. One steady, caring connection can shift your biology toward healing. So next time you chat with a neighbor or share a meal, remember, your cells are quietly celebrating that you're not alone. When the phone finally rang, Harold, 70, a retired bus mechanic in Michigan, hadn't received a phone call that wasn't a scam in weeks. One day, his church started a buddy system, pairing older members for weekly check-ins. The first time his phone rang and he heard someone say, "Hey Harold, how's your Tuesday?" he laughed out loud. It wasn't the words, it was the feeling of being remembered. Soon, Harold began initiating the calls himself. He kept a list of people to reach out to each week. "I thought I was helping them," he said, "but it turns out they were helping me." What this means for a 50-plus listener: connection is not something you receive, it's something you generate. The act of reaching out heals both sides. Instruction: the 3-minute connection reset. Here's a small daily ritual you can try. It works even if you live alone or far from family. First, pick one person you haven't spoken to in a while. Next, take 3 deep breaths to calm your nerves. Don't overthink what to say. Then either call, voice message, or write something brief and sincere. "I was thinking of you today." Finally, after you send it, pause and notice how your chest feels: lighter, warmer, more open. This 3-minute step isn't about building deep conversations instantly. It's about training your body to expect connection again. Over time, it reduces anxiety and lifts moods, small, steady doses of belonging. The Unseen Circle communities across the U.S. are experimenting with ways to rebuild belonging for older adults, coffee meetups, men's sheds, community gardens, storytelling circles. In every case, the pattern is the same. The first meeting feels awkward, the second feels familiar, and by the third, laughter starts to sound like medicine. One volunteer in Arizona said, "We stopped calling it a social group. We called it neighbors checking in." That's when people started coming. Why does this matter? Because the language of connection has to feel natural, not like therapy, but like life returning to rhythm. If you've ever walked into a room and thought, "I don't belong here," try again somewhere smaller, warmer, more human. Belonging isn't a place, it's a practice. A quiet evening in Maine on a winter evening, Tom and Laura, both in their late 60s, began hosting what they called soup nights. Anyone in their small town could drop by. Sometimes 3 people came, sometimes 10. They never made it fancy, one pot of soup, soft music, laughter echoing off the kitchen tiles. They said those nights saved them. It wasn't just about feeding others, Laura said. It was about remembering that life still wants to gather. For a 50-plus listener, that's the message. You don't have to cure loneliness, you only have to interrupt it. Do you know one person who might need an invitation, even just for soup? The house spoke back. It was spring when Elaine, 72, realized her home had grown quieter than her thoughts. The clock ticked, the refrigerator hummed, yet the rooms felt empty, as if even the furniture missed conversation. "It's strange," she said. "You can't hear silence until it starts to echo." Then something changed. A local library launched a phone reading circle. Every Thursday evening, volunteers read short stories aloud by phone to seniors at home. Elaine joined reluctantly. But after the first call, when she heard a stranger's voice reading her favorite author, she smiled without noticing. "For the first time in months," she later admitted, "the house felt like it was listening with me." That's how loneliness begins to loosen, not with grand changes, but with tiny human sounds finding their way back into your space. For older listeners, this means sometimes comfort doesn't come from words spoken to you, but words spoken around you. Being part of a shared moment, even quietly, tells your nervous system you still belong. When loneliness feels like fatigue, many people over 65 describe loneliness as tiredness, not emotional pain, but physical heaviness. Researchers believe it's because constant isolation makes the brain stay in alert mode, watching for safety. That vigilance drains energy, affects balance, and disturbs sleep. One geriatric psychologist once said, "Loneliness is the brain's hunger for connection. When it goes unfulfilled, the body burns itself for fuel." If you've noticed that no amount of rest feels enough, it may not be age, it may be disconnection. The small, daily fix. Reach for rhythm, shared routines that restore predictability. It could be a weekly call, a set time for tea with a neighbor, or attending a class on the same day each week. The brain calms when life regains social rhythm. The healing power of purpose. Not all loneliness is about absence. Sometimes it's about meaning. After retirement, many people wake up and wonder, who still needs me? The answer must come from new usefulness. In Florida, Jorge, 68, started tutoring local kids online. He thought he'd teach them math. Instead, they taught him TikTok slang, sent him memes, and wished him happy birthday through a chaotic video call. He laughed for the first time in months. Helping others is not just kindness, it's medicine. Studies show older adults who volunteer regularly report lower rates of depression and live longer, independent lives. Purpose restores chemical balance to the brain and rekindles joy. For a 50-plus listener, you are still needed, not just for what you know, but for who you are. Instruction. The Purpose Pulse practice. Here's a small way to bring purpose back into your daily life, even if mobility or energy is limited. First, every morning before turning on the TV or checking messages, ask yourself one question. Who can feel better today because I exist? Next, write down one tiny action, a message, a small gift, a prayer, a kind comment online. Then do it before noon, no matter how small it seems. Finally, pause for 5 seconds and breathe in the quiet satisfaction of contribution. This daily pulse, short, steady, repeatable, reawakens motivation and lifts the fog that often surrounds aging alone. The power of shared memories. In one senior center in Vermont, a group of residents began meeting weekly for what they called Memory Cafe. Each brought an old photo, song, or recipe from their past. They didn't analyze or teach, they just remembered together. One man, Robert, brought his wife's old record player. When he set the needle down, the room filled with a faint crackle and an old jazz tune. Several women began humming. One tear slipped down Robert's cheek. "It feels like time forgave us," he whispered. That's the invisible gift of shared memory. It doesn't erase loss, but it layers it with warmth. So if you ever wonder what to do with your old stories, tell them. Someone is waiting to feel less alone because you dared to remember out loud. When isolation masquerades as independence, there's a subtle trap many older adults fall into, mistaking isolation for strength. I don't want to bother anyone, they say. I can manage. And perhaps they can physically. But emotional independence isn't about doing everything alone. It's about knowing when to reach out before loneliness hardens into habit. Helen, 67, lived in a quiet suburb in Texas. She prided herself on never asking for help. One afternoon, she fainted while trimming her garden. When her neighbor rushed over, Helen's first words were, "I'm fine, please don't fuss." Later in the hospital, the doctor gently told her that people who live alone after 65 often delay seeking care because they've built a life around not troubling others. After that scare, Helen began inviting her neighbor for tea twice a week. She laughed. Turns out, needing someone isn't weakness, it's insurance for the soul. For those over 50, this is the truth. Independence built on connection lasts longer than independence built on silence. The loneliness loop loneliness creates its own logic. The longer one stays isolated, the harder it feels to reach out. The mind whispers lies. They're too busy. You wouldn't know what to say. It's been too long. But these thoughts aren't facts, they're symptoms. Breaking that loop doesn't require courage in the heroic sense. It requires one small, uncomfortable action repeated until it feels normal again. Say yes once to a coffee, a community event, a walk. The next yes comes easier. Those who take this first step often describe a shift. Colors seem brighter, laughter feels louder, meals taste better. It's not the world that changed. It's their nervous system coming back online after years of emotional frost. Have you noticed how even short laughter feels like breathing again? When music found the quiet house, Charles, 76, had stopped listening to music after his wife died. It felt wrong to enjoy something, he said. One day, his granddaughter brought him an old Bluetooth speaker. She connected it and played his favorite Sinatra tune. The first note hit him like a memory wrapped in sunlight. He started leaving the radio on during breakfast. Then he hummed. Then he began attending a local sing-along group once a week. By Christmas, Charles said his blood pressure had dropped, and he felt human again. That's the science of sound. Music stimulates brain regions tied to connection and pleasure. When shared, it magnifies that effect. For older listeners, it's one of the easiest ways to reawaken the body's chemistry of belonging. Instruction. The Sound Bridge exercise. Try this small, practical way to reconnect your senses and emotions through sound. First, choose a song that reminds you of a time you felt safe or happy. Next, close your eyes and listen fully. Feel where the sound lives in your body. Then, if possible, send that song to someone who shared that memory or tell them why you chose it. Finally, notice what happens inside you, a soft warmth, a tear, a quiet smile. That's connection being rebuilt through rhythm. Repeat this whenever the silence feels heavy. The brain doesn't distinguish between live company and shared emotion. It responds to both as relief. The bridge between loneliness and love connection after 65 isn't about starting over. It's about rebuilding bridges that time tried to erase. A phone call, a familiar tune, a shared soup night. These are not small things, they are acts of repair. Every human heart, no matter the age, needs to be mirrored by another. And when that mirror is absent, the world loses color. The good news? Color returns quickly when light is allowed back in. So if you've been waiting for someone to notice you're quiet, let this be the sign. The world is still listening. It always was. When was the last time you reached out first, even just to say, "You crossed my mind today"?